9 a.m., so I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know people are still joining, but I want to welcome you today to the NEASC Virtual Global Forum, Sustaining Virtual Learning. We are so glad that you have joined us to explore this important topic with NEASC educators across the world. We've had a tremendous response to this forum with over 1,000 attendees registered from over 25 different countries. My name is Allison Geary, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Commission on Public Schools at NEASC. Working with me today is my colleague Trillium Hiblin. Trillium is the Associate Director for the Commission on International Schools at NEASC. This forum is the second in a planned series, and each forum will be focused on a specific topic. We asked participants for questions in advance of our first forum last week, and we're still using those questions as we focus on today's topics. We will continue to address additional questions as we move on to future webinars. Our forums are designed to use the global reach of our organization and bring together educators from independent, international, and public schools. We have created the hashtag NEASC Forum and ask you to use it when sharing your thoughts from today's discussion on social media. A few words about NEASC and our response to the COVID-19 pandemic before we start. We understand the unprecedented gravity of the situation and the added responsibilities and stress facing school leaders and teachers around the world. We want to thank you all for the incredible work that you are doing to continue learning for your students during this difficult time. Although accreditation visits scheduled for the spring of 2020 have been postponed, your school's accreditation status is not at risk as a result of these changes. We're constantly monitoring the situation in each state and country where our schools and centers are located, and we are in ongoing communications with our schools, and we're working together to design solutions that will work moving forward. We will be planning future webinars by commission that will dive more deeply into accreditation considerations in light of this pandemic, and we encourage you to reach out to the professional staff in your commission if you have specific questions about your school's accreditation. We're here and happy to help. So I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. Today we'll hear from 3 of our colleagues at international schools that were some of the first to make the transition to emergency learning in the wake of the COVID-19 school closures. They will share their experiences and respond to questions that we gathered from participants and provide insights into some of the lessons that they've learned and maybe mistakes that they've made on the front lines of this pandemic. First, we have Gardon, who's the head of the primary school at the Chinese International School in Hong Kong. We have Stephen Taylor, the Director of Innovation and Learning and Teaching, and he's also the MYP coordinator and a science teacher at the Western Academy of Beijing. We also have Stacy Stephens, who's the Director of Learning and Strategic Planning at the International School of Beijing. All 3 of their schools were some of the first to transition quickly to distance learning in late January. Before we start, just a little bit about our format. This NEASC Virtual Global Forum is a webinar and not a Zoom meeting like you've been participating in over the past several weeks or months. Because of the large number of people involved, attendees are view-only participants. Attendees can interact with the hosts and the panelists through the Q&A feature and communicate with other attendees using the chat features. Please use the chat to say hello to your colleagues and pose questions for them, and use the Q&A just for questions for the panelists. I will be monitoring the question and answer and the chat features during our webinar, and Trillium will be asking our panelists a series of questions to respond to. Today, our goal is to focus on several more specific topics, such as strategies for teaching younger children and children with special needs, as well as supporting the social and emotional health of students in the school community. We'll also talk more broadly about their experiences leading distance learning in this extraordinary time. So let's get started. I'd like to turn it over to Trillium, who will have our panelists introduce themselves and then kick off the questions.
Thank you, Allison. So first off, we'd like to ask you to each introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about the context that you are working within at this time. Stephen, would you mind starting us off?
Yeah, sure. I can't get the video to come up right now, but my name is Stephen Taylor. I'm the Director of Innovation in Learning and Teaching, MYP coordinator and a high school science teacher at the Western Academy of Beijing. We've been online, or we closed at the Chinese New Year, so it's been this is the 10th week now. We did take a break after about 6 weeks to pause and reflect. And it's been an incredible energizing, stressful, rewarding journey along the way. And so we hope that some of the things we have to share today will support others as you get online too.
Thank you. Anne, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Anne, and I'm in Hong Kong with the Chinese International School in the primary school. Like Stephen's school, we started February 3rd. That was our first week of online learning after the Chinese New Year. So we are also in our 10th week, although on spring break this week. And yeah, it's been an incredible journey of continual change and reflection and growth. As we've evolved each week, I can say that week 9 looked nothing like week 1 did. And I think that's been probably the biggest growth point for us, is to expect that it will evolve, and that is to be expected and embraced.
Thank you, Anne. Stacy? You're on mute.
My name is Stacy Stephens, and I'm the Director of Learning and Strategic Planning at the International School of Beijing, literally just up the road from where Stephen Taylor is. So we are in the same situation as Anne and Stephen, that we all started planning for this actually during our Chinese Lunar New Year break, and then started without anyone ever being in a room together, I think, at least for us, to plan what it was going to look like. So even all of our planning was remote. We're also in week 10. We actually canceled our spring break and took our spring break and spread it out throughout the semester to give us more frequent breaks, because this is, I think for us right now, this is a marathon. And I think our context is we're a little bit surprised that we're still doing this at week 10 and thinking that we're probably going into week 18, 19, 20, that we're probably doing this to the end. So I do think that your title of the webinar, Sustaining E-Learning, is really apt, because I think we're in, positions where, as Anne said, like what we started out with is not where we're at, and where we're at right now, we may not be where we are in 10 more weeks either.
Thank you. Maybe just for a little bit of more context, could one of you just talk for a moment about the types of students that go to your types of schools? Because there may be people joining our webinar who are from US or UK based schools that don't have the kinds of student populations that you have, and it might be interesting to understand. I think you all have a very similar set of student body. Could you just, one of you, explain that to the audience, please? Anyone?
Sure, I can jump in. At Chinese International School, our student body is actually very stable. So probably easily likened to an independent school in the US, where students come to us primarily from Hong Kong and stay with us from reception all the way through to year 13. So our families are largely based in Hong Kong and have been longtime Hong Kong families that are very connected to the school and very much focused on the school as a center of their community. It may be quite similar at ISB and WAB as well, but with perhaps less movement or transience in our student population.
Our students, we have over 50 nationalities, and currently we have about 50%, maybe a little bit more, that are still within Beijing or close, and about half which are spread all across the planet. And it's pretty similar with our staff as well, our teaching faculty. And so, before this meeting we began, we were talking about how people were trying to make their way home. So managing this interesting situation while half of your faculty and half of your kids are fully displaced and in different time zones it's been a big challenge, but people have really stepped up to it.
To sort of piggyback on that, the challenge of where our families are located and where our teachers are located. For many of us, we've had to choose to be in environments that are more asynchronous than synchronous because of the distributed nature of where we all are. We have about 60% of our students still in China, but 70% of our faculty outside of China. So we're a highly mobile sort of group of people, especially right now. We're very mobile and people are constantly moving around. And so are our kids and so are our teachers.
Yeah, that creates some interesting dynamics for your communities for sure. Okay, I'm going to dive into the first question that came up during our last forum. Many times, many people have asked questions like this. We are wondering, from your perspective, what has worked best for the youngest learners in your community that does not require them sitting in front of a device all day? And related to that, what role have parents had to play in supporting the youngest learners?
Do you have an order that you'd like us to take this in?
No, why don't you start, Stacy, since you started speaking.
The early years program has been, I think, throughout this journey, a challenge, especially I think for parents, because we, from the beginning, said there was going to have to be a high degree of parent participation in order to facilitate the learning of our youngest learners. And so that puts our parents in positions. I mean, we all see the memes on Facebook and the rants and the, affirmations of teachers from parents, right now going around, because I mean, it is a particular challenge, I think, for the parents. So we've really focused on how do we support the parents. Early on, we've been sharing like tips and articles in particular with them to help them think about how learning in the early years is different than what you might think about once you hit like first grade in particular. We've focused on story time as our synchronous aspect. And we've had a lot of hands on deck to do that with librarians and bringing different people in. So the kids are seeing different people. So circle time with stories every morning, and then lots of play provocations have been given. I mean, I think about those little DIY engineering kits that like parents can get for their kids at home. Like a lot of the work that our teachers are putting out is really integrated in nature, investigatory and inquiry in nature, but offline and not a lot of screen time, which really puts a lot in the hands of our parents. So we've said from the beginning that participation is optional in pre-K3, pre-K4, though we do have really high levels of engagement. It's always been laid out to families as an optional choice to remain with the program in pre-K3 and pre-K4.
Thanks, Stacy.
Yeah.
Stephen?
So in the Western Academy of Beijing, the early years team they've been doing phenomenal work, right, to try to help the parents understand how the learning's working, and to keep them informed. They use the student-facing blogs for the families to help set up the learning all the time, and that's where they can also give feedback to the families with the learning that's taking place. They use choice boards, so sending things that the different ways or different pathways for students to engage with the learning that suits the context that they're in, and that's going pretty well. They do make sure that they have engagements that are online and offline, so that there's the options for parents to make it fit the life that they have currently. And then they also have things in their options that students or kids can do independently too. So they're trying to get it's very much a balance between the synchronous face-to-face Zoom type workshop elements and the asynchronous, make it fit in your context when you're ready. But yeah, we notice for sure the parents have to be very, very involved. And that's it needs a bit of support like all the time. Yeah. And the encouragement that people are doing a really good job. And even as parents, right, it's a shock to the system, and for teacher parents too, that can be a challenge as well. So yeah, that's something that's been going pretty well, I think.
Thanks, Stephen. Anne, I'm going to unmute yourself. There you go.
Sure. We found from the beginning till now that we've actually increased the synchronous screen time. I think when we started with the early years in particular, we were the most cautious about screen time and the most conservative. But I think that what we were seeing was that parents, I think without that kind of ability to observe the teacher with the students live, that parents were kind of at a loss as to what does it really look like in the classroom. So as soon as we started to increase a bit more of that live interaction, parents seemed to feel very appreciative and more, I guess, kind of empowered to do some of the asynchronous work together with their child. So we have a combination of the synchronous and the asynchronous, and the blend seems to be working well. And as everyone has adjusted, the appetite for live interaction has increased across the school. I'm sure you've all seen the same. So it's been a combination of brief mini lessons, read alouds, and videos pre-made by the teachers. And we do send all of our learning plans the week before on the Friday afternoon to give parents an opportunity to preview. And we bundle anything that's needs to be printed as a PDF, and highlight in the learning plan what's synchronous, what's asynchronous, and have used extensive use of Seesaw. That's been probably the biggest platform that we've used from reception through year 4. And it seems to have been really extremely well received by parents. And again, many times parents have said to me, because they were able to see the interaction between their child and the teacher, they've had these kind of light bulb moments of, wow, so that's how it's done. Because most of our parents wouldn't have this firsthand experience of, being in the role of teacher of a 4-year-old. So I think it's been an adjustment for the kids, but really well received. And I think it's smoothed things out for families as they've been able to see things in action and then take away their kind of learning from that to help their child when they're offline.
Yeah.
Thanks. Do any of you have any tips for our listeners about how to overcome access issues when it relates to either poor Wi-Fi or the parents not speaking the target language, or perhaps families moving around a lot and not having the time or the safe place to do the learning that you've asked of them?
Yeah. Great question. I would say that our student support services team have really kind of stepped into this role in just that much more in terms of their capacity to support students. So they are in touch individually with families, and we have families in different time zones and families with actually device limitations because they have multiple children, for example. And so those people have really taken it upon themselves to be mentors and direct contacts to families to either review the teaching points or to just provide one-to-one sessions, even if it's over the telephone, to help students and parents feel like, okay, we have a general overview of what's been happening and this is what I can do next.
Yeah, that's good.
Anyone else on that front?
We're in the Chinese international schools context, right? So we're always quite aware of access in terms of always having to plan for things that are available, behind the firewall or outside the firewall, or things that will be able to be accessed easily. So for sure, issues around speed of internet or things being blocked, they become kind of primary questions in planning the tools that get used for the school and for the home learning. And so in some of the kind of wishes going forwards from the early years group, they're thinking about like, how do they minimize the reliance on the text side of things for the parents who might be second language learners themselves, right? How do we make things more visual, but also try to balance that with the demand on bandwidth or devices? So it's constantly, I think they're making very careful, mindful choices about what is it that's being sent into the home, and are there different ways that the families can navigate that? But it's,
Yeah, we have a new language program also as well in our early years program up through 2nd grade. So everything that we've done that's instructions for students or teachers is in English and in Chinese. So I think that's a huge language support for our early years teachers and for our lower grades as well, because a lot of the information is accessible in Chinese, and we make really big efforts when we can to also translate into Korean, depending on what it is and how that we can help support, because those are our three main language groups, are English, Chinese, and Korean. So we have more support probably on the Chinese side of things because of our dual language program. And, like Anne said, it's really also our learning support and our EAL teachers who are really, I think, functioning in a quite different way than they did when they were in the building, and really kind of getting in there and helping teachers and helping families help navigate some of what they're seeing to support their children.
I'm gonna raise my hand and just ask a question. Sorry. Thank you for everyone that's asking questions on the Q&A. We're not going to be able to get to all of them. There's so many, but we will definitely curate them and try to answer them in future webinars. Just a couple of really quick things. Do you want to just each say which platforms you're using for students? And also, you had talked about a choice board, Stephen, and people were confused or wanted more information about that. So if you could just talk about platforms and the choice board, that would be great.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things we think about with the technology is, and with everything we assign, we have to be very mindful not to create this extra pressure into the home context that we don't really know that much about. We keep in close contact as a school with the families. So thinking about what's being given, the choice board is essentially the different ways that students can approach the learning, something that can be technological or non, something that can be visual or more text-based, or something that they have the ability through the day to choose what it is that they're doing as learners, especially for these young kids, right? So it's just helping the parents help the kids make the choices about how they approach their learning in the day. You actually find lots of examples of them in the temporary closure Facebook group and all the various support groups that have popped up online. So if you actually looked some of those up, you'd find some good examples posted out there that are visual or suited to different contexts or different languages. So they're good examples. In terms of platforms, we have WordPress blogs for the elementary school and the middle school. And that's where a lot of communication goes out, but also where there's the exchange for the elementary school in particular. Like I have a son in grade 3. His work gets posted often to his blog, and that's where his teachers can give feedback, but also post the engagements for the week. And then they plan how they're going to approach them. In the middle and high school, we have Moodle and Microsoft Teams and a bunch of other things that plug into them.
We in the elementary school use Seesaw, but we are actually in the midst of sort of reflection meetings about are our platforms meeting our needs? Because I don't want to say anything shocking, but I think a lot of us in Asia are also thinking, what if we start school like this? What if this happens, again? So we're really using this opportunity to kind of reflect on what we have and think about what we might change for the future. But Seesaw is our primary platform in the elementary school, and we work with a platform out of Singapore called Teamy, which is our learning management system for our secondary school. And like Stephen said, other sort of strong tools like Flipgrid and, Loom and things like that work for people that are also being incorporated and embedded into the LMS and the different things that we're using.
Loom's really taking off with some of our elementary teachers for the explain everything type approach. Yeah. And then Flipgrid.
Flipgrid's great.
Everybody loves a Flipgrid. Yeah. It's brought out the creativity and the bonding between people. But being apart has really helped people connect. And some of our elementary teachers, or teachers across the whole school, but there's some very funny Flipgrids that a couple of our teachers have put together. It's really good.
And how about in Hong Kong? What are you using?
In the primary, from reception to year 4, we're using Seesaw. And then in years 5 and 6, primarily Google Classroom. Well, I shouldn't say Google Drive. We are, like Stacy said, we are thinking ahead and looking to probably the next phases of this in the more distant future and looking at Google Classroom. And Google Classroom is used extensively in our secondary school as well. But we do send out our learning plans simply by email on the Friday, so that it's kind of a traditional mode, so that parents receive those via email, and there are PDFs embedded in that. But then from there throughout the week, all the tasks and assignments can be found on Seesaw, and that's where kids post their work and where they receive feedback. And then they receive feedback in year 5 and 6 through Google on their docs and slides.
Great, thank you. Could we dig a little bit deeper into this question of supporting students with special needs or language special needs? How are you using your entire staffs? What kind of supports are you putting in place to ensure that these students can be successful?
Yeah, I can jump in. So again, our SEN and EAL teachers are working together in kind of a very special capacity. I think in amazing ways. They've really done incredible work to connect with every single classroom teacher, to basically say, how can I be of assistance? When we transitioned to Zoom, we started out using Google Meet and transitioned to Zoom several weeks ago. That allowed us to use the breakout rooms. And that is where our student support teachers can be in small groups with students to provide targeted support. But we've also built into our schedule study halls and one-to-one sessions and small group sessions that are outside of other live instruction for work that basically collaboratively the teachers have said, look, let's provide some extra support in phonics, let's provide some extra support in reading comprehension. And then again, working with families to set up times that are regular in the schedule to meet those needs. Our learning leaders have also joined in that, and our TAs as well. So I think it's been a whole small army of individuals who've really risen to the occasion of how can we support individual students. And remarkably, I feel that it's worked quite well. And some people say that they feel they know their students even better through this experience, and feel that we're really making great use of our resources.
That's a really nice observation, that people are getting to know some of the students better than before. You know, the necessity to understand where kids are, and different ways to kind of track if they're okay, you know, first if they're okay, and then how they're getting on, is really important. And yeah, our learning support and EAL teachers are really doing a fantastic job at making sure that they reach those. I know one of the comments from the learning support was that they noticed that some of the families are quite well aware of their child's own strengths and next steps, but some aren't that used to actually seeing their own kids as learners because they're with us all day long. And so supporting the families in how do you help your student as a child learn through this situation has been quite powerful, I think. And then some of the strategies that they use, like so in the middle school, one of our learning support group leads started to synthesize the main tasks for the students under her care each week and put them onto a single post or a single email. And it became quickly apparent that what was good for the few was good for the many. And now that's allowed us to adapt the practice as we go forwards. And to just try to, like, as we know, things can get quite scattered with information. So trying to keep things focused, trying to cut the word count on instructions. Head of EAL in the middle school, he provided some very clear kind of ways to frame things, simple instructions for students, you know, read this, think about that, produce that, you know, just to try to help reduce the cognitive load on kids while they're in distance learning too.
To sort of tap into what Stephen was saying about, you know, parents sort of seeing their children as learners for the first time. And I think for students who need additional support, I think there sometimes can be additional challenges at home. And so our EAL and our learning support teams have kind of gone through and kind of set some priorities and some values for their work. And one of the number one priorities is how do you help preserve that parent-child relationship in a time that for many of our families can be really tense, at home, and as they're learning more about their child as a learner, and especially if they're learning support, starting to see and understand why they might need more support and where some of those challenges are for that child, and really just setting a priority on that family, that parent-child relationship, to make sure that that's preserved throughout e-learning. And really coming lower is really, modifications and access to grade level curriculum. It's really kind of putting those social emotional pieces as probably one of the core pieces almost in front of the academic. I would say that for all kids, but I know that this is a team that sat and really had that conversation about the social emotional needs of our students who need additional support. And I think one of the things that's very interesting to me is, in this situation, I think everything's amplified. And if a team is really well functioning and really high functioning, they're really high functioning in e-learning. If they had challenges around collaboration, then they're going to have a lot of challenges around collaboration. Yeah. And so what we'll see is it's really hard, I think, for EAL, at least for us, for EAL and learning support to say, this is what it is, because it looks perhaps one way in 5th grade because of the composition and the makeup of that team, and it looks a different way in 3rd grade, really with those EAL and learning support teachers, I think, kind of coming in and fitting in and complementing in the ways that teams need. So sometimes they're running lessons, sometimes they're doing strategy lessons, they're pulling kids just like they might in the classroom, but some of them maybe have moved to more of like a one-on-one tutoring situation with students who need it. And so the dynamics and the sort of the organization of it looks a little different at every grade level, I would say. And it looks a certain way in the middle school and a certain way in the high school. I think one of the things that our teams had to do early on, because I think starting this up for us was very overwhelming for our teachers, that we're really lucky to have a lot of support at our school in both EAL and learning support. And they would, be going to people and saying, what can I do? And people were so overwhelmed that they really couldn't even respond with what they needed done. And so they've worked out kind of like menus through the lens of learning support, of like tier 1 support, tier 2 support, tier 3 support, to kind of give teachers ideas so that they know what they can ask for. I think we were all like, what's the next step? And I can do what's right in front of me. And people coming from the outside offering support, though appreciated, it was not always easy to avail yourself of that support when we were initially starting off. So having some of those tools and resources of like, what can you do for a teacher, a class, a grade level in an e-learning situation, where some of those things that we had to work out pretty quickly to help some of our members get in and do the jobs that they wanted to do to support kids and teachers.
That's a really great observation.
Oh, sorry.
Because it's, just piggybacking on that, like that's, everybody was like rabbit in the headlights, because the notice was, we were making sure that systems and things were working, but the notice was a surprise. And then by Monday we were open and online. And then really, like, now that you mentioned that, you do observe it was the learning support and language support teams. They really came into their own after the teachers were able to feel, okay, we've got this now. And then as they were observing what the students needed and showing the concrete examples of how they can support, then it really helped move people forward.
It's taken a while to work out those systems and structures for us. Anyway, they weren't, I think our systems and structures and our directions for, we want to see these things taught and want these kinds of learning experiences, we were able to put up front. But how our support faculty was going to integrate and support that took a little longer to work out. And I think everybody did a little bit differently.
And we thought it was going to be a short-term temporary thing. We thought we'd be back within a couple of weeks, right? So
we did.
And then now it's not. So,
Within the chat here off to the side, I've noticed a few people asking, do you have any tips for schools that don't have a deep learning support or EAL team that might be one person or not even? How could they support those students in a virtual situation without the types of teams that you all might have?
I think one of the things that is pushing us because of our situation is that we're more asynchronous than synchronous.
Yeah.
And I think everybody wants to take what we do in school and just move that online. And I think that the real opportunity as a teacher is to not think about that I have to have everyone in front of me at the same time for everything that I do. And scheduling out like those strategy lessons, like what do kids need? And so I'm going to meet with these 5 kids about this rather than thinking I have to deliver, maybe I deliver my mini lesson and that's for all students, but then I'm assigning students into strategy groups and I'm using my time, shorter bursts of time with a fewer number of students to have higher impact instruction. Kind of what you would do in the classroom, right? That you would set up students in stations and circulate, around there based on their needs and what their next steps are as learners. But I think it takes a while. We've never been able to replicate that because of the distributed nature of our faculty. And so that's really pushed us to think more specifically about the child and what their particular learning need is.
Yeah. And
utilize our time to organize students to serve them in that more one-on-one small group capacity.
That's good.
Anne, do you want to add something there? Oh, sorry. Right before that, Anne looked like she was going to say something. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just really agree with what Stacy has talked about, that, because we have this kind of unique learning environment now, if we don't have student support teams to do that, teachers, if you have the ability to be online with small groups of students, that is an opportunity to provide that kind of differentiated support and instruction and follow-up that is tailored to one student or small groups of students. We've seen the power of it in perhaps, in a sense, part of the power of it is that, the age-old debate of pull out, push in, that kind of goes back and forth in schools. To some extent, that question is just taken away because it's between the teacher and a small group of students, but not the whole class is witness to that, if that makes sense, so that it's comfortable. And it seems that there's been great reception to it by the students and their parents to take us up on those offers to, hey, why don't we get online to get together at 2 and just talk through the teaching points, and I can answer any of your questions. So yeah, if possible, again, it depends on your context and where people are located, but if possible, I think providing that online time in small groups can be really supportive.
Great.
It helps make sure that they're seen, right? And I was thinking too, like if we're not particularly well resourced, we still have core principles of EAL and language support, right? What is comprehensible input? And so how do we know that the reader or the person interacting with the text or the instructions will understand it? And then where is the active output? So I think people know these pieces too. So what do they need to be able to understand, and what do I need them to be able to do, and how simple can we make that if we don't have the big resources of a large EAL department? I think sometimes we notice too, like you can probably assume that kids will use technology and families will use technology to Google Translate and do those kinds of things. So reading with that kind of mind too, how do we keep sentences short, perhaps in instructions that a parent might need to run through a translating app that's not overly complicated or too loaded with little traps in language. Yeah.
Great points. A few of you have mentioned the social emotional aspects of this and how key that is. How are you supporting students in all of the different ways they need to be supported, and either continuing some sort of advisory role or pastoral care role that you may have already had in place in your schools before this started?
Stephen, you go first.
Okay. It's interesting following what some different schools do and how they've approached it. But I think at our school, that's become more important for sure. And it's slightly different in the different school sections. So the homeroom teachers and that central point of work and contact and relationships in the elementary school. In our middle school, we have the mentoring and advisory program. And so our students actually, even though it's mostly asynchronous, they still have a check-in with their mentor each day that's run through Moodle. And then there's middle school and elementary school grade level assemblies. There's the student council run different events and activities. We shifted recently in the middle school to having a kind of summary email that's partly progress, but largely social emotional, sent to the parents and the student each week to try and reduce the volume of emails related to work, but also to help have single things that they can understand. So that's worked really well. In the high school, I think a big thing that's helped move forwards there is the mentoring approach. And they were using an app in-house called My Time. But the school's also been working a lot with Ellen Mahoney from Sea Change Mentoring, and has really been working towards developing a strong mentoring program. And that's become incredibly important in helping the students stay connected and seen and known through this experience. And especially as a kind of early warning system, almost, to find where students might be struggling and to deal with them compassionately and clearly. And now that we know we're at this point where we're going to be doing this for many weeks to come, how do we help them perhaps re-engage or recover or move forwards? But then the community is a phenomenal community as well. And so they're working together to create experiences or events that will help keep people bonded. Just the other day, there was a tea time concert on Zoom and all kinds of other things that have been happening. The councillors held a pub quiz every Friday night and things. So a lot of really cool things happening to try to keep people bonded.
Stacy?
We as well have, sort of when we initiated our plan, we kind of had a 5-week startup plan that we thought would be done by week 6, but it wasn't. But it was sort of like a slow growth plan. And in week 3, we asked, many of our teachers had done it already, but on week 3, we brought back in mentoring and morning meeting. And it's the one synchronous expectation that we have, is that at least once a week, mentoring and morning meeting happens so that everyone can visually see each other. I saw earlier that someone had asked a question about attendance, and I think taking and tracking attendance and having a system around that of referrals when you see disengagement, I think is a really important process in monitoring students, because they might be able to check in and keep it together for 20 minutes on a Tuesday. Yeah. But what's their day-to-day activity look like? And I think having an attendance policy and approach and a referral system through attendance is really important. And really, I mean, I think our counselors have been very engaged with students, monitoring that, contacting families, getting principals and administrators involved to check in on families and check in on students. We just had conversations the past couple of weeks because we are sort of at this, what is a dawning midpoint for us. It kind of became a little bit, I would say, of a low point as well, because we were noticing less engagement from students. But I would also say it's been a little bit of a low point for teachers as well. And so when we're talking about the social emotional health of our students and the assemblies that we're running, I think middle school has an online spirit week, this week. We've had to talk about how are we taking care of ourselves and taking care of our teachers, right? Like how are we feeding that energy and managing those social emotional pieces for the adults who have to turn around and give so much, to kids. And it's been something that we've had, we've done a lot around that. We've had a lot of conversations around that. And it's sort of like we cycle through them and around them about every 4 weeks to kind of check in on that SEL component for adults and kids and start to think about, well, what could we do different? What would feel different? What would bring some energy and excitement and kind of put some air back into the system? Our conversations, I feel like we circle around about every 3 to 4 weeks to have those conversations and make sure that we have those rallying points, which are so important, I think, in the life of schools. And we're all losing our rallying points. In some ways, we're not having our field day. You know, you maybe have lost the grade 2 circus. So how are you bringing some rallying points back into this, into the system to put some, to really put some energy back into the system?
Thank you. Anne, do you want to add to that?
Sure. Very similar ideas and events and thoughts happening at CIS. Different events with the same idea. How can we, give everyone a shot of enthusiasm and spirit, change things up a little bit. Things like we had a press conference for every year level on Friday. Zoom press conferences to answer their questions that they'd submitted, but to also kind of in a journalistic way highlight some of the really fantastic things that students are doing. But just to kind of change the rhythm, because actually in a regular school week, you would have all of these different, like Stacy said, rallying points, assemblies, online assemblies, Spirit Week, Student Choice Day. So trying to kind of infuse these different fun, unifying community events. And we're learning as we go. We're getting ideas from our network, from different colleagues around the world. They, as fun as they sound, they're actually a lot of work behind the scenes, logistically, to pull off, right? So we, as I look back, I think, we should have done all these things so much sooner and so many more of them. But I think it was Stacy who said, in the beginning, we were just kind of nose to the grindstone trying to get the whole thing off the ground. And so it really wasn't until about week 3 or 4 that we said, okay, we really need to kind of start to bring these things in. At the very beginning, when we started live sessions with students, they were actually not instructional. They were to touch base. How's it going? What questions do you have? How's your family? And I think that was actually a really great place to start. But interestingly, maybe it was because of that human connection over the first couple weeks, then students kind of settled and they were ready for the instruction. Then they themselves were ready for class, so to speak, online. So I think in looking back, we knew that we needed to evolve into direct instruction online, at least some of the time. But I think that those first couple weeks of just getting together with your class and having morning meeting and reflecting on the day and asking about each other's families was actually a good kind of foundation for moving forward together. So I think, at the end of the day, the human connection, it really comes back to that, the well-being and the connectivity that we feel to each other, that we can kind of have the strength to move on and to, take the next wave of changes, because we're also probably at the halfway point as well. And it is a lot of work. So we have to, take time to just stop, do things differently, enjoy the moment, and then, get back into it. So quite similar, I think, to WAB and ISB.
Great, very helpful. So I'm going to change gears just a little bit here, because another important question that keeps coming up for us is about what are your schools doing in regards to reporting this semester and parent-teacher conferences, for example. And has this experience in any way changed your school's views on what excellent feedback looks and feels like?
Great questions.
I'll start first on this one. Because we've had to report already, because we're not just looking at end of semester reporting. We had to do quarter reporting in our secondary. So elementary school does not do mid-semester reporting, so we didn't have to figure that out. there, but for the middle and the high school, we just issued report cards, I think this week. They'll be going out to parents. And we ended up really, we're a standards-based school, and so we report along those lines. And so we have 4 levels. And so we did actually collapse it to 2 levels and make it a little bit more binary. I know there's a lot of conversations going on in the States, in Canada, about pass-fail. We didn't go to that language. We kind of used our own language that we already have at the school, which is that you're meeting our expectations or you're not meeting our expectations. So we're really trying to communicate with parents and students. Are you on track to be at the end of the year where we believe you should be, or are you not on track? And then I think our student as a learner comments about the behaviors and the dispositions and the attitudes towards learning take on a greater sense of importance in this venue. We do Strand reporting, so we stayed at Strand Reporting, and the high school does a 1 to 7, which is really in alignment with IB. And so we kept the 1 to 7 prediction in high school and reported at Strands in high school and middle school. We are talking about actually doing our full regular report card for the end of the year, because we have been doing this for 20 weeks. And our teachers feel like they don't have enough evidence to report. And so those conversations are going on in the secondary school. We are also talking about making modifications in the elementary school. And again, maybe only having 2 levels for elementary school. And we actually are not doing science and social studies. We dropped our units. We're not a PYP school, so we dropped our units of, we call them units of inquiry through science and social studies. And we actually did not from the beginning do science and social studies, and decided to really focus on reading, writing, and math. So we're gonna have to change our report card anyway, because we didn't do science and social studies, but have actually offered some extension opportunities around science in particular that families can choose to do, rather than it being a part of our core content and curriculum right now. So that's sort of where we are at on grading and assessing. And I feel like there was another question at the end of that too that I'm not remembering, or maybe I hit it.
How about parent-teacher conferences if you're doing them? So yeah,
we canceled those.
Yeah. Okay.
And we probably won't reschedule them. And part of that's just part of the conversations that are going on in our own community. I think there's more one-to-one contact between teachers and parents right now in this situation, and also trying to give a priority over to instructional time, because none of us can do as much as we would in a face-to-face environment.
So you don't want to take an entire week off for conferences
Correct.
Conferences because it takes the teachers away from teaching. Okay.
Yeah, and the parents are so much more engaged, especially in elementary school, with what's going on with their kids and feedback.
So that kind of does relate to that ongoing feedback question. You know, are you finding that that continuous feedback is maybe more helpful than a once or twice a year formal session that we normally would have in a, I know we do both, but that was the other second part of the question there.
Well, and I think we're really, I think, you know, in the elementary school, there's so many submissions of learning that teachers are actually really struggling to even keep up with feedback. And we've had to talk about, like, you know, how do you pick the high leverage pieces and then give the best feedback there, because there's so, if you go into Seesaw, the number of submissions every day is astounding. You know, thousands of submissions in a week. So I think the feedback piece is still, we're struggling on how to manage the amount of work coming into us and to give high quality, continual, impactful feedback. I don't think we have that worked out.
Stephen and Ann, how would you answer that question about reporting and feedback? And
the feedback one I'll talk a little bit about, because it was something that came up early in the thing as what the parents notice, right, is when do they get the email response, or how do they see the grading that's been done on the students' work. And so we've produced some graphics type stuff and trying to help students more see what it means to own the feedback in different ways that they can generate or access or take ownership of the feedback that they're given. So like the attendance in a virtual tutorial is a rich way to get feedback immediately on your thinking, right? And all of these things that we can do to create a culture of thinking within the classrooms online. But also I think allowing people to explicitly name and notice that this is different forms of feedback. It's not just me marking it and having to give it back to you, and trying to depressurize some of that exchange, that transactional element of work, I suppose. Just this week, last week, this week, and next week, really, we're in the big conversations with teachers about what does the rest of the year look like. So we're, again, like Stacy's school and Anne's school, we're looking at something that could be 18, 19, 20 weeks that we predicted at the beginning would be short term, and then we'd be able to come back and continue as normal. But that's obviously not happening. So now, as we're a 3-program IB school, PYP, MYP, DP. Now we're asking for teachers to think at this point, planning ahead, how can a student be successful but not overwhelmed? So how do we prioritize core learning objectives and core criteria that haven't yet been addressed or they could easily improve? Also thinking too about how do we maintain a sensible scale of assessment. So sometimes these things that could have been quite big ongoing projects in the face-to-face setting, it's not manageable if a student's alone, lonely, isolated, and the work is invisible for a long time and then a product appears. So these are the things that we're working through right now, and we're hoping to report mostly as normal for most kids in most subjects in most contexts. And that if we aim to show that we've maintained a good quality program, that we also then know how we can support the students who have had significant struggles. And so we don't want the students to be punished by the pandemic, right? So the ones who really want to keep on going, and many of our kids have not skipped a beat through this, they've just kept on going, right? That they should be able to progress as they planned. But we also don't know what next summer looks like, and we don't know what the rest of it looks like. So we've always kind of got a mind to what comes next. And I think in schools like ours that are thinking quite flexibly about how learning works, it's helped put people's minds into that place where we might think about supporting students in different ways. It's all very complex. There's all the different pieces that come together. I think now in the middle school, so we can't, like Stacy, we can't sustain parent-teacher conferences. You know, you can't have that virtual queue of teachers behind the table, right? So what we'll end up doing is having the mentors in the middle school as a case, having that session with parents and students, so a student-parent mentor conversation will happen at some point when the family is ready for it during this month. And the mentors will help have that conversation. So at least there's that connection with the school and the family. The PYP, they're looking at modifying their report a little bit to becoming something more descriptive. And up in the high school, we still have the MYP for a couple of years. And we're thinking there, at what point do we have to work on a pass versus grade for special cases with students? But of course, that all is a process of who do we interact with in terms of their mentors and their counselors. So yeah, it's
Great.
Exciting times.
It is. I realize that we're running short on time here. Anne, would you like to make a last comment or two about this topic before we close?
Sure. The secondary school did run all of their conferences online actually last week. And I participated as a parent with our 2 kids at home. We did Zoom conferences, 10 minutes each. And I have to say they were the most comfortable, informative, efficient conferences I've ever been to. And the feedback has been enormously positive. So it really gave us in the primary confidence that we will move forward with our plan to do something similar with online conferences at the end of April, knowing that it does take away those 2 days of live instruction, but the learning plans will continue, the students will continue with their their learning offline on those 2 days. And we know that those conversations will be slightly different and perhaps in a sense less formulaic, because teachers won't necessarily be the only ones bringing something to the table. Parents will also be invited to share their perspective, their observations, and but the tone with the secondary conferences was very positive, and I think it just kind of solidified that true partnership with parents and teachers. Our reports, I think, like WAB and ISB, will remain largely the same, actually. We will go down from a 4-point scale to a 3-point scale, which is something that we have been talking about doing anyway. So in a sense, this whole experience is really an opportunity to make way for changes that you've been thinking about anyway, and some minor adjustments to learning objectives that are we have not been able to embed in the online learning environment, just because of the practicalities. For example, some things in science and PE, but they will be largely the same, and we hope that that will validate all of the work that our students are doing and our teachers and our parents are doing to really hit those, at least those fundamental learning objectives that we've really kind of tried to drill down on and focus on in these 9 weeks, and probably 9 weeks ahead of us as well.
Yeah.
Great. I know that we're 1 minute over, but I am going to ask you one very quick question that has been popping up in the chat constantly, which is, what are you doing about graduation? Could you answer that really quickly?
We are contingency planning. We are, like all of us, really reaching out to our network, and people are sharing all sorts of different ideas online. There's some shared documents for virtual graduations. So we're in the stages of contingency planning for several different scenarios. And I guess that would be my advice to anyone, is maybe plan A, B, and C, knowing that, you know, we can't predict, but yeah, it's looking like we may need to do something online and try to just make it as festive and unifying as possible.
Just to back up on that, it really is multiple scenario planning.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's a part of us, we're hopeful that we actually might be able to do graduation on campus. You know, many of our students are in Beijing, and if we could offer them that, and then how do we do another version online for students who can't return? But it's multiple options. But how do we make sure that we don't lose our rituals, and that we stick with the celebrations that we need to have, whether it's graduation or, you know, whether it's, again, finding those rallying points and finding new ones. We're trying to do that for graduation as well.
Very similar here. Celebration's a big part of what it means to be at Webb. And so I know that the high school team are working on at least 3 different scenarios for how we might manage a really positive and joyful end to the school experience for those students, because there's definitely a sense of loss for those kids in grade 12. And how do we see them out well?
Great. Thank you so much. Yeah. Allison, I'll hand it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for all of your insights, and thank you for everyone who participated. I know there were so many questions on the chat and the Q&A. There's just no way we could answer them all in this hour, but we will certainly go back through those. And as we're planning for future webinars, really take into consideration some of the questions that you've raised. We invite you certainly to connect with one another. There was a lot of great ideas shared on the chat, and so hopefully you can find the answers to your questions as you connect with one another. We want to thank our guests, Ann Gardon, Stephen Taylor, and Stacy Stephens, for contributing your time and expertise today for this forum. For 2 of them, it's very late at night. For 1 of them, it's very early in the morning. So we appreciate you getting together at a time where we can all learn from your wisdom and expertise. You can find their contact information on our website, and after this webinar ends, you'll receive an email with a survey, and also an email tomorrow, probably with a link to the webinar recording, as well as their contact information. So I think they would be happy to have you reach out to them if you have specific questions.